quilty friends, it's Carolina Moore, your favorite sewing and quilting YouTuber, and today my Baby Lock Jubilant and I are going to show you how to snowball the corners on quilt blocks. I have two different blocks that I'm making in different sizes, and I'm going to show you a no waste way to snowball your corners. You ready? Let's get started. So what I have here is a 12.5-inch square of fabric, and we're going to snowball all four corners. Now you don't have to snowball all four corners when you're doing this technique, but if we make a traditional snowball quilt block, then you do snowball all four corners. So we're going to start off with a large square and small squares. In this case, my large square is 12.5 inches and my small squares are 4 inches. Now you can use any ratio you want when you make a snowballed quilt block. You just want to make sure that your small square is less than half minus 1/2. So in this case, my 12.5-inch square, if I fold it in half, would be 6 1/4. Subtract half from that would be 5 3/4. So I want to make sure that this corner is less than 5 3/4. And the reason for that is that if you make your snowballed corners any bigger than that, you end up with a diamond in a square block, which is not what we're going for. Okay, so I have my 4-inch small squares and my big 12.5-inch square, and we're going to snowball these corners. We're going to attach these squares to these corners and sew on the diagonal to flip it open, and then that snowballs that corner. And to have that diagonal, I'm just going to take my ruler and I'm going to draw a line on the back of this square. I'm using a regular ballpoint pen here because I want this to be really visible to you through the camera so you can see. You'll want to use a marking pen where you can see the line, but where you don't have to worry about the ink bleeding through to the front. Okay. Now, as long as we are drawing lines on the back of a triangle, we're just going to go ahead and draw our lines on the back of all four, because then we will have all four of our squares ready to go. There we are. We're going to take each square, we're going to line it up with our big square, so the diagonal line is not coming from this corner, it is crossing across. So this corner and this corner don't have a line, it's these two corners that have the line across them. We're going to take this to our sewing machine. Then you just put it under the presser foot and sew. Now we're not using a 1/4-inch seam allowance. In fact, we're not using any seam allowance at all. We're just sewing on the line. Once we're done, if we want, we can go ahead and do all the others, but I'm going to show you this one all the way through and then I'll do the others. We're going to trim this up to a 1/4-inch seam allowance. If you want, you can eyeball this and use scissors, but I have my rotary cutter and ruler here already, so easy enough to do that. And then I have my iron here, so we're going to go ahead and just press this out. And there you go. I have one corner of my quilt block snowballed. Depending on the pattern that you're making, it may have you snowball all four corners of a block or just a couple of them. And it may even have you snowball corners with different sizes of squares if you're making a pictorial block. So I have lots and lots of free quilt block patterns that use this technique of snowballing the corners. And sometimes it'll be a big on this side and a little on this side in order to get the shape of the animal or critter or whatever noun that we're making in the quilt block. So big question that I get on snowballing the corners is, okay, this was a lot of wasted fabric that I trimmed off, right? What if you don't want to waste this much fabric? Great question. I'm so glad you asked. Let's do another corner, but this time we are going to reduce the waste. So I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to line up one of my squares with the corner. I'm going to sew. And I love my Baby Lock Jubilant for all of these kinds of projects. This is the machine that you see me using in most of my videos. I also have a Baby Lock Ballad, a Baby Lock Sausage Roll machine, and now a Baby Lock Long Arm as well. So as a Baby Lock ambassador, I definitely love my Baby Lock machines. But I love using this machine in my videos because the Jubilant is a really great entry-level machine in that it's not incredibly expensive. It's very portable to be able to take to classes, and it has some of the features that for me are indispensable on a sewing machine, and that is a needle threader and the thread cutter on the side. Without those two, I go a little crazy with a sewing machine. Okay, so let's talk about no waste on this quilt block. You can see that we could just go ahead and cut this at our 1/4 inch seam allowance. But instead, I'm going to go at a 1/2 inch. So I'm going to make a 1/2 inch here. And you could do this at the beginning as well. Make 2 lines, one on the diagonal and one 1/2 inch away. I'm just going to go ahead and do it now. And then bring this to the sewing machine. And now we're going to sew on this line. There we go. So now I have 2 lines of stitching, and when I do the same thing as before, which is cut a 1/4 inch away from that first line of stitching, the big diagonal across the entire square, I have the same waist that I had before, but now it's already sewn, and I have this bonus 1/2 square triangle that I can use in another project instead of having 2 random halves of squares that aren't sewn together. This is a much more functional piece. And on my block itself, I've actually lost absolutely nothing. I still have the exact same as before, snowballed corner. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and snowball the other 2 corners, and I'm going to use that no waste method so that we can keep our little triangles, and we have these 1/2 square triangles that we can use for another scrappy project. So I'm going to go ahead and snowball those other corners, and then we're going to talk about different sizes with our snowballed corners. Okay, there is my snowball quilt block completely done. All the different corners snowballed, and this is such an easy and fun quilt block to make. I just love that. It's so simple, and you can add a lot of interest to a quilt, and a lot of shapes can be made by snowballing the corners. It's almost like making like a faux circle, because you get that circle-ish shape without ever having to sew a curve. Which, by the way, don't be afraid of sewing curves. They are not hard, and I have another video on curves if you want to learn about curves and learn about sewing curves. Okay, so we are going to do this again with a smaller square and even smaller corner squares. And I'm doing this for 2 reasons. One is because I want to show you a different method other than drawing lines on the backs of your squares. And second, I want to show you a quilt block with different snowball cornered proportions so that you can see that you can really do different proportions on your big square and on your little square to get different interest in your quilt. Okay, so first I want to show you about diagonal seam tape. I couldn't use diagonal seam tape on the big block that we did because these big corner squares, like the little corner squares, were really big, and they were bigger than the bed of my sewing machine. But with these little squares, they are smaller than the bed of my sewing machine, so I get to use diagonal seam tape. Now I have another video where I talk all about my love for diagonal seam tape, but it comes in a roll and it's washi tape that has lines drawn on it. And it's super simple to use. You just take it and you line it up under the sewing machine so that, so so that the red line is lined up with your needle. Yep, and I did that just right. So my red line is lined up with my needle. Now I'm running it across the entire front of the machine, and then I'm just tearing this off. And I have extra back here, you can see. I want to bring that to the front because you don't want to cover up your feed dogs. Oh, let me bring my needle up. There we go. You don't want to cover up your feed dogs with your diagonal seam tape because those feed dogs have a job to do and they can't do it if they're covered up. So I just tore this off roughly. No big deal. But you can do this with scissors if you want it much neater. And then this little bit, I'm going to throw it away. An entire roll is less than $10, and this you can use over and over and over again. You can leave this on your machine until it wears out, and then you just put some more on there. A roll will last you basically as long as you can find your roll. And I'm not kidding here when I throw this in the garbage, but I lose these rolls before I run out. I've probably gone through like 3 different rolls of diagonal seam tape, and only once have I ever gotten to the bottom, and that's because I put diagonal seam tape on 70 sewing machines on a cruise ship, and it was already a roll that I had been using for a couple of years. So it's like, how many machines does it take to get to the center of a Tootsie Pop or a roll of diagonal seam tape? Many, many, many more than 3. Okay, so now we're going to snowball the corners using the diagonal seam tape. I'm going to show you how easy this is. So we're going to take our big square, we take one of our little squares, put it on the corner just like before, but now we don't have our line drawn. Come here. There we go. We don't have that line drawn. So I'm going to take this point right here, where our line would be, and I'm going to put it right at my needle. And I'm going to take this bottom point and put it right at the red line. And now I'm going to sew. I'm going to try to keep this left hand out of the way for you so that you can really see that I'm just taking this point right here, and I'm keeping it lined up with that red line all the way down. There we go. And now I get to the end, and you can see same thing. I've got a snowballed corner. All I have to do is cut this off. And I can also do the same thing as before, where I sew a 1/2 inch from this side to be able to give myself a little extra bonus corner. But this bonus corner is going to be really small, so I'm not worried about that. I'm going to go ahead and repeat this process, snowballing all 4 corners on this block using my diagonal seam tape. And you can see that I did all 4 corners, and you can do this with any of your snowball blocks because they're not crossing over. There's no seams crossing over one another. You don't have to do the corners one at a time. You can do all 4 and then bring it over to your cutting mat and cut all 4, and then bring it over to your pressing mat and press all 4. And that's for doing 1 block. If you're doing a dozen blocks, just sew the corners on all dozen blocks, and then come over here and trim all dozen blocks, and then go over to your ironing board and iron all dozen blocks. You don't have to go back and forth and back and forth. Alright, so let's give these corners an iron. So you can see my 2 blocks. This is a 12.5 inch block. This is an 8 inch block. And on the 12.5 inch, I did 4 inch corners. On the 8 inch, I did 2.5 inch corners. So these are a lot smaller corners. And you get a different look to your block when you're just adding a little bit to the corners versus taking out a big chunk. These will change a little bit more because once you sew them into a quilt, you're losing that 1/4 inch seam allowance all the way around the edge. So this will get a little bit, will go in a little bit, but you can make these snowballed corners really any size you want, as long as it's less than half minus 1/2 of the length of one side. And I'll have that down in the description as well. Less than half of 1/2 of the length of one side, with some math to help you figure out exactly what that means if math is not your forte and you just want to sew, which is totally allowed and totally encouraged. Alright friends, so that is my little tutorial on how to snowball the corners of quilt blocks. I hope you enjoyed this. Give it a thumbs up. Leave any questions or comments down below. And friends, if you are not subscribed to this channel, please subscribe. It really helps me be able to create more content for you when I grow that subscriber number. So we've been really working hard on that here. Hit that subscribe button, share my channel with friends, let them know that they should subscribe so that I can create more videos for you. All right, friends, that's it for today. I will see you right here real soon. Bye for now.